Picture this. It's midnight in medieval Eastern Europe. Villagers are huddled in their homes, garlic hanging from their doorways, crosses clutched tightly to their chests. But why? What were they so afraid of? The vampire, that immortal, blood-drinking creature of the night, has haunted our collective imagination for thousands of years. But where did this legend really come from? Buckle up, because we're about to dive into the dark and twisted origins of vampire folklore. You might think vampires started with Dracula, but these creatures have been terrorizing humans since ancient times. The Mesopotamians feared the Ekimu, angry spirits of the dead who would return to drain the life force from the living. The ancient Greeks told tales of the Empusa, a shape-shifting seductress who fed on young men's blood. And in ancient China, they had the Jiangshi, hopping vampires who would steal your qi, your life essence. But it's in Eastern Europe where our modern vampire really took shape. In the 1700s, a weird hysteria swept through the region. Villages were digging up bodies left and right, convinced their dead relatives were coming back for a midnight snack. The thing is, they actually found what they thought was evidence, bodies that looked fresh weeks after death, with blood around their mouths. Here's the kicker. What they were seeing was just normal decomposition. Bodies bloat, making them look well-fed. The skin shrinks, making it seem like hair and nails had grown. And that blood around the mouth? Just normal fluid leakage. But try telling that to terrified villagers in the middle of a plague outbreak. Speaking of plagues, that's where some of the weirdest vampire myths come from. When tuberculosis was ravaging Europe, people noticed that as one family member died, others would slowly waste away too. They didn't know about germs back then, so obviously the only logical explanation was that the first victim was coming back to drain their relative's life force, right? But here's where it gets really interesting. Every culture had their own unique spin on the vampire. In Romania, they had the strigoi, troubled spirits who could appear as normal humans by day. In Greece, there was the vrikolakas, who would knock on doors, calling out their relatives' names. And in Russia, the Yupper was basically a floating head with a trail of blood behind it, metal, right? The modern vampire, though? You can thank one person for that, John William Polidori. In 1816, he wrote The Vampire, creating the first sophisticated, aristocratic vampire in literature. This was the blueprint that Bram Stoker would later use for Dracula. The sophisticated count, the sexual undertones, the whole 9 yards. But why do these stories stick around? Maybe it's because vampires represent our deepest fears and desires. Immortality, but at a terrible price. Power, but with a curse. Sexual attraction, but mixed with danger. They're monsters, sure, but they look just like us. And maybe that's what makes them so terrifying. Think about it. Every time we think we've moved past these old superstitions, vampires just transform themselves for a new generation. From Nosferatu to Twilight, from scary monsters to sparkly heartthrobs, they just won't stay dead. Kind of fitting for an undead creature, don't you think? And here's a wild thought. Maybe the reason vampire stories have survived so long is that they tell us something about ourselves, about our fear of death, our desire for eternal life, and our suspicion that maybe, just maybe, there's something lurking in the shadows, waiting to remind us that we're not at the top of the food chain after all. So next time you see a vampire movie or read a vampire novel, remember, you're not just experiencing a modern story. You're tapping into fears and beliefs that have been haunting humanity since we first gathered around fires to tell stories about the things that go bump in the night. And who knows, maybe there's a reason we still hang onto these tales. After all, has anyone ever actually proven that vampires don't exist? Sleep tight, folks, and maybe keep some garlic handy, just in case.